Hi, Scott Haskin here, host of the HaskinCast Podcast, Uriah Heep, the Magician's Podcast, and guest host on another show which may or may not have been announced by now. Obviously, I'm taping all these well ahead of time so I can get them uploaded, but if it has been announced, the link will be in the show notes. Check that out. It's a great show. Very excited and honored to be a part of it, and you can check it out. And if not, just keep checking back because the links will be there, and it will also be announced on my website. And I don't know, maybe I'll even do like an email blast. I send out an email to my mailing list like once every 4 or 5 months or once a year. So, not a chore of how many emails that you get from me. Problem is a lot of people forget that they even signed up for it. And when I send an email, they're like, I don't know what this is. And they just then delete it or, unsubscribe. So if you have subscribed to my mailing list, you did it because you did it and not because I put you on there. They're all manual subscribes. So thank you very much for that. And if you're not on that, you can go to www.scotthaskin.com, go all the way to the bottom, and there is a subscribe link there. And you can also just click the link in the show notes as well. Here we are about to return to our third part of our four-part, yeah, I'm a great host, 4-part series on Cobra Kai, the wonderful Netflix series, which is basically like a reboot of the movie series The Karate Kid. The Daniel LaRusso story with Johnny Lawrence, and then they've kind of peppered in some other things from the other movies as well. So far, it has just been incredible. 5 seasons in, and amazing. I'm very much looking forward to season 6. I just want to point out, I tend to get a little nitpicky about details because, and I've talked about this on the show before, I'm kind of a continuity person, and I'm kind of one of those people that, not just continuity like, oh, look, there's a Starbucks and this is Game of Thrones, not just that kind of continuity, but things that just don't make sense within the universe or the history or, how things are put together. I don't remember if we talked about it on the show, but it all started with just little things I would notice, like in Die Hard. The first time I saw Die Hard, I wasn't even 18 yet, and I'm noticing that, well, his shirt was a lot dirtier 5 minutes ago, and it's a lot cleaner now. How is that possible if this is the progression of, one night? Just those kind of things, and then things that just didn't make sense, like, okay, so he's taking her out for seafood on page 95, but on page 5, she's allergic to shellfish, so why would the author have picked Red Lobster to take her to? Those kind of things are just things that I notice, and that's kind of how I started working on books for people, doing proofreading and things like that, just because I would pick up on those kind of things. So I never do it in a mean-spirited way. It's not about that. It's just pointing out things that I found that were interesting to me anyway. So total respect to the show. They do so many things. It is so impossible to catch every little thing. The first book that I wrote, my brother and I think between the two of us, we read it 13 times. And we're like, okay, it's right. Everything is spelled right. It's all phrased right. It makes sense. It's done. It's good to go. And then when Tamara McDaniel and I went to do the audiobook of the first version, we found all kinds of errors. And it's just like, your brain already knows, so it skips over a lot of things. So it's very easy to miss stuff in the process of writing or shooting or editing, that sort of thing. So I never say anything in a mean-spirited way. It's just more stuff that I point out as a point of interest. So I hope it's taken that way. And let's get back to part 3 of my discussion with John Mottola from the Deep Purple podcast. But what's interesting is, apart from the two of them, none of the other kids from their school were in this season. So Anthony's love interest, I can't remember her name, but that young girl that he was interested in, and all his friends that got into trouble and got suspended at the same time Anthony did, none of them were in this season. So I'm thinking that somewhere in season 6, that arc has got to develop a little bit too, because now the dynamic between those kids is going to be different, especially if it's different between those two kids, then everybody else now is going to have to change too. And she was, of course, the neutral party because she wanted to be friends with everybody.
Right. Well, they also need to develop more. I know that I was reading something about there's only so many times you can do a karate fight scene before it gets boring, or what are you going to do with it? Which is why another reason where I think that after this season, they could call it quits, because how many different fight sequences can you see? But I think having different opponents or different motives behind it is what's going to make it interesting. So I think that at some point, maybe Kenny and Anthony might duke it out to solve their differences. Kind of the old trope of once one of us knocks the other one down, all right, now we're good. Like after the fight's over, it's like, all right, I beat your ass. Like now we're friends.
Like the way that Robbie and Miguel did.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Which, like, let's talk about that for a second. That had me on the edge of my seat.
Oh, yeah.
Because I didn't know what to think after the whole Johnny and Carmen baby thing. I'm like, this could go like either way, because I've been faked out so much in this season. So when they fought their way up to the stairs and he started pummeling on Robbie, I'm like, oh God, he's going to fall off the railing and he's going to paralyze him. Oh my God, this is not good.
Yeah.
And then he showed mercy on him, and then they became friends. And I found that was really, I felt it was convenient, but also realistic. Like that's the ideal of what you want to happen in that situation.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody doesn't get knocked out, that's usually how a fight ends. Somebody has to go enough. Right.
And, yeah, but I mean, I was on the edge of my seat, because I'm like, I don't put it past this show to knock Robbie off of the thing and have him break his back or something. But I don't know. I had a feeling that Miguel wasn't going to do that.
Yeah, I really liked that was the moment that he had that restraint, that he just kind of screamed and let all that aggression and anger out. The only thing I didn't like about that fight, and it was very much an edge of your seat. I mean, it felt like Miguel had the upper hand, like he's maybe a little bit better of a fighter than Robbie. But at the same point, it's like Robbie was holding up his own pretty well.
Oh yeah.
But what bothered me was, so Johnny is yelling at them once they run up the stairs. His ass should have been up the stairs as soon as they were up there putting a stop to it, because now there's the railing, there's, history, and they always talk about history repeating on this show, right?
Yeah.
So you're kind of waiting for that moment, and they set it up so perfectly where you think Miguel's going to kick him over the railing. But that was the one thing, now it's dangerous. It's bad enough when they're on the ground, but now they're up on a second floor with not a lot of protection. Johnny should have been up those stairs instead of just yelling at him to stop fighting, because obviously they weren't going to do that.
Right.
But so that was the one thing that bothered me about that scene. But I thought the rest of it was, and the emotion that those two had, I thought was fantastic.
Oh yeah, I mean, the emotion in the scene, the actors are great. I mean, that's one of the things that I like about the show is that the younger cast are just they are great actors. They're really part of helping you identify and care about the new generation cast, because I like a lot of these shows when you kind of have the old and the new, the nostalgia and the new cast, it takes you a while to warm up to the new cast, or you're just like, the new generation, this sucks, I'm not interested. So it really is a delicate balance. But I think the reason Johnny didn't stop him is because he spent a better part of that whole episode getting those two to try and resolve their differences. So he knew he had to stand aside.
But he was telling them that the fight was over. He's like, all right, stop, fight's over, guys quit.
Well, because he was worried about him. But yeah, I think at the same time, he wasn't jumping in, because in the back of his mind, he knew, all right, the escape room didn't work. Olive Garden didn't work. It's like,
and if Olive Garden isn't going to solve your problems, I don't know what will.
Well, hey, as a card carrying Italian, Olive Garden solves nothing. All right.
That's right.
So don't say that in front of me.
That's right. And I may not look Italian, but I have a lot of Italian in my heritage. One thing I know is that you don't go anywhere to someone's house without stuff, and you don't leave without stuff.
I can confirm that is true.
So I'm curious to, there's been a lot of references to Rocky III. And even early on when Johnny pitched to Daniel, we should have our own fight. And then in season 5, Daniel plants the idea of, for Robbie and Miguel to have their fight. He goes, maybe that's what we should have done. Maybe we should have duked it out until the end. I have to think that the final ending of the show will be a Rocky III ending, and we won't know who wins. But I'm wondering who's actually going to be the fighters, because I could see it being Daniel and Johnny. I could see it being Robbie and Miguel. I could see it being Tori and Sam.
I mean, it could even be bigger than that, because don't forget, they're still in that world karate tournament.
That's true.
So somebody's got to go to that, and that could be the new chosen, could be the new villain over there. They could introduce like a new like generation chosen, like the relentless guy from the other country who shows no mercy, and and maybe they all band together, and it's going to be one of them versus the new villain, and that person is the champion for all of them. I mean, that could also be because I can't believe that with that world tournament hanging over their heads, that it's going to come down to, like you said, Miguel versus Robbie, this one versus that one. I think that's kind of, at this point, they position that to be small potatoes, because now you have the big tournament coming up, and they're probably going to fly over there, and they're going to meet new rivals, and that's going to cause all of them to band together. I mean, that could be another way that it goes.
That's very true. Very true. It's going to be interesting to see. I get, when it gets a few seasons in, I get to that point where I'm like, I just hope the writers can keep up the pacing of the show. I hope that, they don't start getting crazy, trying too hard to come up with the ideas that they need to. I don't get the feeling that this is a series that was mapped out from the beginning all the way to the end. I think they're just kind of like, okay, now we got to write 10 more episodes. What are we going to put these people through?
Well, yeah, I don't think that they knew at all, because I mean, they were on a smaller time platform until Netflix picked them up. So I mean, that could have just been a one and done thing. Who knows?
Yeah. And shout out to Netflix, by the way, for saving this series from YouTube, because if it would have ended the way it did on YouTube, I mean, we would have missed out on so much.
Yeah,
absolutely, so much. Interesting side note on if you guys, obviously anybody who's listening to this episode probably has Netflix. There is a show called Nailed It, and on the Halloween season this year of Nailed It, both the actors that play Dimitri and Sam are on. Sam is a guest judge, and Dimitri is one of the contestants. Doing a horrible job making replicas of things that they put out for them to make. They do these really elaborate desserts, and they're like, okay, now you have to make it. And no one can ever come close to these ridiculously, I mean, these are things that would take a professional hours to do. Yeah. And they're like, you got 45 minutes, like just do something, So it was fun watching the two of them interact as real people, and not just, like in an interview situation and stuff. Like there's so many interviews with these people on YouTube. But I want to talk about Robbie too, because I think there is another actor that, I mean, he has to bring so much emotion to his character, and seeing all the things that he's gone through. I mean, just his eyes as an actor, like so many times, like he's got fear, he's got, times he's upset, times he's just like given up. He's probably had the biggest emotional arc of anybody on the show. And I got to give props to him as an actor, because I think he's just fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that it's not a new type of character, the good-looking guy from the wrong side of the tracks type of story, where circumstances are what made him bad, type of thing. Because you see him as a kind of a hoodlum, like in the first season. You see him at home with the light, that the electric is off and everything like that. And his mom is basically abandoning him. And you see that glimpse of him like, oh, I thought we could watch a movie or something together. And she's like, no, I'm going out. And then and then you kind of feel like, okay, between Johnny not being in his life, his mom being pretty much a deadbeat and everything. All right, I see where he got here. Right. And then he goes to LaRusso's and he takes him under his wing. And then of course he's distrustful. So when the first bit of mistrust comes in, he immediately shuts everybody out. And, you're really pushing for him and Johnny to have a relationship, which that was one of my favorite parts of this season, is finally like the two of them going to Mexico. And you could see that like Robbie was pissed that he kind of deceived him into doing it, but not the same kind of pissed he would have been at him like a few seasons before.
Right. Yeah. Well, that
just kind of like annoyed.
That moment after the last tournament at the end of season 4, when they met up at the Cobra Kai dojo, I thought that was such a beautiful moment for them, for Robbie to just be like, I don't want to hate you anymore. I don't want you to be the blame for all my problems. I just thought that was such an amazing thing. And it was all that moment when he was about to hit Hawk and he looked up and he saw Kenny and he's like, that was just such a defining moment for him, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that was just such a beautiful exchange between the two of them. And I thought that was going to set up some pretty amazing things for season 5.
Yeah.
But I first saw the actor that plays Robbie. I can't think of his name at the moment, but I first saw him actually on Girl Meets World, where he was a character that came in towards the end. And I thought, this guy's a pretty good actor. I wonder what else he'll go on to do. And then when I saw he was in Cobra Kai, I'm like, well, that. But I think the casting on the show is just phenomenal. I mean, the ensemble that they brought, and it's tough with kids because they're going to grow the way that they grow physically. Like if you look at Kenny between season 4 and season 5, he's like a whole different guy, just like with Anthony, whole different kid. And so it's like really tough when you're working with young kids to see how they develop. And the girl that plays Devin Lee, she's another one where I'm like, she's a really good actress and she's got, kind of a tough role to play. And they really cast this so well. And between that and the fight choreographers and everything, this is just such a well done show from top to bottom.
Oh yeah, I mean, easily one of my favorite shows in the past, I don't know how many years. I mean, I just since season 1, I've been singing its praises for just being so good. For all these reasons and more. I'm sure that there's a ton of them that we probably won't get to today. But yeah, it's so well done, and I think it's because it hits all the points. It's something that everybody can relate to, because there's a lot of stuff in it that is the kind of the something you see in a TV series or a movie, which are pretty predictable. Some of the things we talked about, storylines or the way the characters react to things, but there are also things in there that aren't. But I think it's something that it's all stuff that everybody can relate to or at least get invested in, because I mean, we've all been like if you're younger, you've all been in the situation of the clickiness of teenagers and the stuff that goes on there, and everybody loves a good fight scene, which that fight in the school would never have in season 1 would have never happened in reality, or season 2 or whatever it was. Like the big karate battle, like in the school, like when in God's name will it ever have gotten to that, but it was cool to watch. But even like being an adult and seeing the adult relationships and how they go back and forth, which are still rooted in like even the beginning of Daniel and Johnny's interaction is still that carrying things from when you were younger into being an adult. And I'm sure that we've all felt that too.
Oh yeah.
And it's just, I feel there's just so much in there that people can hang on to or can relate to, that's why it's a good show, regardless of whether you know the backstory or not.
And I like that it's done with real language too, not like shows where they won't swear and they sugarcoat or they work around swearing, like, heck, darn, and golly gee and stuff, where it's like, just say the fucking word, But I love that it's real language. It's like people really talk. And I think that brings out a whole nother level of realism to the show, because it feels real world, even though the situations, like I learned karate when I was young, not to the extent these kids have, but I learned some. I have never in my life had to use karate every day to defend myself. I've never been in this many fight situations. Like, it's just like, that's just not realistic. But I love that it feels real world apart from some of the situations that these kids end up in.
Well, that's the world that they developed, though. This is the Cobra Kai world. So again, suspension of disbelief. Yeah. Nobody in real life is going to get into that many karate battles in like a day or even a week. Yeah. But when you're watching the show, you're like, okay, this is their reality. But you also have to think too that some of the episodes are probably spanning over who knows how long. It's not just one day. So if you think about it, it's,
that's one thing about this show that does get a little bit confusing. And I'm not saying this to bash them at all, but the reference of timeline is really confusing because, they're in high school, but we don't really know what grade they're in. I can't imagine that they're not seniors and they did the All Valley, yet they go back next year and it's the under 18 All Valley. So that, okay, maybe this year they're seniors. And then Miguel goes to Mexico after the school year is over and he says, I'm in high school. So does that mean he's a senior now and they still have another year of school and there's another All Valley? Like the reference of time is not really well defined, but it doesn't necessarily need to be on this show, except for that's like the only one thing that would matter is if they're over 18, they can't be in that tournament anymore.
Right.
So that's the only point that, or whether they go back to school versus being out of school and having to say, get a job or something like that.
So, I mean, yeah, for the point of reference, they were probably freshmen or sophomores at the beginning of the season. And maybe in the final season is when they're going to be seniors, even though most of them are in their early 20s at this point. But look like they could still be in high school. But yeah. I mean, that's also not the point. It's kind of like Raging Bull was a boxing movie, but there was no boxing scenes in it because it really wasn't about that.
Right.
So I think it's kind of this is the something similar in reverse. Is just like what's important about it. Is it really important what grade these guys are in or whatever? I guess if you really want to break it down and be critical of the timeline or the writing or whatever, then you could be like, well, if they were but it's like, then that just kind of takes away from how fun it is to watch the series.
It's almost those people that mapped out the Overlook Hotel in The Shining and found out that the hotel makes no sense whatsoever, right. Based on the different scenes. Yeah, you could. I just, as I'm thinking about it, I've questioned that a few times. I'm like, okay, so they're back at the All Valley, but it's under 18. How old are these kids? Like, where are they at in the timeline? Because that's a little confusing. But and I tend to be one of those continuity people. I don't try to be. I just see things. Like when they had that flashback of Kreese and Silver when they were young, and Silver's like, my dad doesn't want me doing this dojo. He doesn't want me, he wants me to take over his business. Otherwise, I'm out of the will. And Kreese is like, hey, we're just ramping up. I got this kid. He's got the same name as me. And I'm like, wait a minute. That doesn't line up with Johnny's flashback because when Johnny met Kreese was already older. And this dojo already had it was almost like a repeat of Daniel's entrance when he first went to Cobra Kai in the movie. It was already established. Kreese was older. They had the back of his head, so you knew it wasn't the young Kreese. So like that stuff doesn't line up. I can't help it. I just see those things.
I mean, I knew that too, because when he was talking about just starting up his dojo and meeting Johnny, I'm like, if this is like a couple of years before the original Karate Kid, then Kreese must have aged like horribly because he was still the young actor played him. He didn't even look remotely like Kreese did. So I'm just like, yeah, that I did notice.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was just like, okay, I'm going to just put that aside. I think for conversations like this, if you're really breaking it down, that's where it really comes into play. Yeah. But I mean, outside of that, when you're actually watching the show, it doesn't really, I mean, you could break that stuff down and poke holes in it, but then it just kind of makes watching the show not as much fun. If you're like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, it doesn't make it fun if you're mad about it.
Well, and it's interesting. I think it depends on the show for me. I'll give you an example. And this is one of the reasons I started reading audiobooks or reading books for authors, because I would find little things on that. Like, okay, on page 5, she was allergic to shellfish, but on page 90, he's taken her to Red Lobster. So, that doesn't line up. Right. And that's how I started doing books. But okay, so the Amityville Horror reboot, or I'm sorry, the Poltergeist reboot that came out a few years ago. I'm watching this movie, and I've worked in mortgage for most of my life. So here's a guy who just lost his job. His wife is an aspiring writer who has not written her first book yet. And they're getting a 3-level, 9-bedroom house. They're getting approved for that. I'm like, who in the hell is approving them for this loan? And that was in the first 15 minutes. So right there, I'm like, now you've taken me out of the story. You can sell me anything. You can sell me Dune. You can sell me Star Wars. You can sell me The Walking Dead, and I'll be in that universe with you. But it has to make sense. And so with Poltergeist, that took me out of the movie. And then they find the clown doll and they leave it in the kid's room. And he's like, this really creeps me out. And they're like, oh, just keep it in your room. I'm like, what? Who are these people? Like, it didn't line up to reality. So I didn't like that movie because of it. With Cobra Kai, I love this show so much that I'll notice those things, but they slip out of my mind. Like I'll pick up on it and I'll go, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, or that's kind of weird, or that doesn't line up. But okay, well, yeah, who cares? What's happening now? Like it's I love the show so much that I can bypass a lot of that.
Yeah, I think that happens with a show like that, which I have a very few of them where I become attached to the show and to the cast, where I love and care about them so much that I'm just willing to forget about any inconsistencies at all.
Yeah.
So
I want to talk to you about the music in the show too. But first, I have to say, let's talk about Martin Kove as an actor. I mean, here's a character that in The Karate Kid seemed very one-dimensional. Coming back in The Karate Kid 3 was that exact same guy. You see him in Rambo. He's pretty much the same guy,
Yeah.
But boy, in this series, especially this last season, he has really shown he's got some acting chops.
I think, well, first of all, I was cheering at the end of the first season when he came out of the shadows, smoking the cigar. Mm-hmm. That was the first moment for me where I'm like, this series is going to be something else. I jumped off the couch. I was like, oh my God, it's great. So, but he's very measured. He's very, in some ways one-dimensional, but I don't like on the surface, but I don't really think he is, because you could tell he doesn't want to let you in. Mm-hmm. He seems very uncomfortable around people. Like even when he's talking to the therapist and whether he's faking it so he can try and get out, he's like, Doc, it's like, I'm not buying him being like, oh, gee whiz. And she didn't buy it either.
Yeah.
But even when he was spilling his guts, like when he was talking to Daniel and Johnny, and he's just like, I want to help you. You could tell that he could just give a shit either way. Mm-hmm. Like, help me, don't help me. I can take care of myself, whatever. He just seems really stoic, really like an island. Yeah. But yeah, I definitely think that he's a good actor and he's a good character, but it's really tough because he's made it where I don't see him aligning with anybody. Like, I don't see him breaking down and being like joining forces with Daniel and Johnny, even though he's got that, you could feel that tie and that relationship that he wants with Johnny, because he was, it goes so far back as him cultivating him as his star student and everything and taking him under his wing. That's the only time you ever kind of feel that emotion coming from him, even though he's still got that kind of straight face and almost no emotion. Mm-hmm. But it's just like he really positions himself into a way where the character, whether it's the actor, is doing it this way, or this is just the way that he's acting. The scenes is that you just don't know what his motive is. He just seems almost like so emotionless, or like nothing affects him, that it's like, I don't know what way he's going to go. Like, I can't see him like crawling to Miyagi-Do going, oh, I was wrong. Like, I hung up all my stuff on Cobra Kai. Like, I think that he believes in what he is and who he is.
Well, I think
he's going to stick by it.
I think they set it up, and it just came to me as you were saying that. First, I'll say that the turning point, I think, was when Johnny said, when he was waiting for Daniel to come back with his call to the lawyer, he said, I want to erase everything you ever did. And I think that was when Kreese actually had that realization, because you saw in the last tournament when he had those flashbacks to, when Tori said, I don't need to cheat to win. And he had that flashback to what he put Johnny through. And you see he's starting to awaken a little bit. But I think it was what Johnny said, I want to erase everything you ever did. that's when all of a sudden he became like, wow, I'm irrelevant. And the emotion really got to him at that point, because that's when he started opening up to the therapist, had those flashbacks and all that.
Yeah.
But you hit on something. I think what's going to happen, because he's got nowhere to go, right? So he broke out of prison. Whatever the repercussions for that, I don't know. But Cobra Kai is dead again, right? As far as we know. So wouldn't it be interesting if in the beginning or somewhere along, because we don't know when the next episode is going to start in the timeline. It could be 6 months down the road. It could be a year. It could be the next day. But wouldn't it be interesting if this time Johnny is driving down the road and he turns and looks and he sees a Cobra Kai sign or storefront or something, and he finds out that Kreese is back and opened up Cobra Kai again, replaying that moment where Daniel drove by and saw that Johnny had reopened Cobra Kai with the storefront.
Interesting.
Because they do a lot of those mirror type scenes.
Yeah.
So it would seem like now it would be Johnny that would turn around and see Cobra Kai has opened and find out that Kreese is not dead or whatever.
Yeah, it could be. But I mean, it would have to be months in the future after. But I mean, I feel like they would know, because Kreese still broke out of prison. So I think that it would be highly public that they caught him, they brought him back, maybe they exonerated him. Who knows? I don't see those guys with their
fingers on the pulse of where their enemies are all the time aren't going to know that. Yeah. If they play it up to where he just disappears, like they don't hear from him, and they do it like 3 or 4 episodes in, maybe, like maybe. No one knows where he is. They haven't heard from him. And even every once in a while, they're like, have you heard from Kreese? No, I haven't heard a word. And then all of a sudden there's Cobra Kai again. Right. I think that could work, but it couldn't be like first episode or anything like that. It would have to be a little ways in, because remember, Cobra Kai still has an approval to enter the tournament.
Right.
So I could see Kreese finding out about that, because as far as I know, he doesn't even know that's what it is.
Right.
So if he finds out about that and then he somehow starts up Cobra Kai and recruits new people or whatever, I don't know how it would play out, but I see that being a really cool way to introduce that back into the show.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah. I mean, we'll have to wait and find out. I don't know when the next season is due to start. In one of the interviews, William Zabka said that they had already shot a lot of the stuff that didn't make it into season 5 is going into season 6. So they've already got like a good head start on it. The last 2 years, it came out on New Year's Day. And then this year it came out in October. So I don't know what the schedule is for the next season to start, but I'm really excited to see where this goes, because it's just so brilliant.
Oh, me too.